Why does a drop shot rig regularly outfish setups that cost 10 times as much, on the same water, with the same angler holding both rods? The answer isn't about price, it's about depth. Most rigs are built to move horizontally through the water. The drop shot is the only common freshwater rig designed to stay vertical and stationary at a precise point in the water column, without any effort to keep it there. That single distinction is why it keeps winning comparisons it has no business winning, and why anglers who figure it out tend to get very quiet about their midday numbers. A guide on Table Rock Lake in the Missouri Ozarks started logging his client catch data by presentation, type, and time of day a few seasons back. What came back from that data surprised him. Clients fishing drop shots during the midday lull, even beginners who'd never tied one, consistently outperformed clients running heavier presentations. He's been running it as his default midday setup ever since. This is on a lake where most tournament anglers would raise an eyebrow at finesse fishing. We'll go through why fishing the right depth zone changes everything about how you read the water, how to set this rig up correctly, including the details most tutorials skip, what bait and hook combinations actually move the needle, and the conditions where you should put it away entirely. And there's one thing I want to come back to at the end. It's about leader length, and most tutorials get it wrong by about 1.5 feet. Fixing that one number changes how many fish you actually convert. Most anglers think about fishing in 2 dimensions. There's the surface, there's the bottom, and the retrieve moves the bait through the space between them. The Texas rig sinks, you drag it. The crankbait dives, you reel it. A jig falls, you hop it. Every one of those techniques assumes the fish will intercept something moving laterally through their zone. The problem is that bass and walleye and crappie to varying degrees spend most of their time in a specific temperature band in the water column that often has nothing to do with the bottom. On lakes with a pronounced thermocline, which is a layer where water temperature drops sharply and fish don't cross regularly, the fish stack above it. In clear water lakes during summer, that might be 12 to 18 feet down. The bottom could be at 30 feet. Every Texas rig you're dragging across that bottom is 12 feet below where the fish are sitting. You're working an empty room. You've probably had this experience without knowing the cause. You've found fish on the sonar. You can see marks stacked at a specific depth. You lower a jig to the bottom and drag it around for an hour, and nothing happens. Then you switch presentations and the fish turn on. What you stumbled onto was a way to get your bait to the right depth and hold it there. The drop shot does that on purpose, every single cast. The setup is specific and the details matter, so let's go through it exactly. You tie your hook directly to your main line, not at the end of it. Use a Palomar knot, which is a loop through the eye knot that preserves close to 100% of your line's rated strength when tied correctly. Pass a doubled section of line through the hook eye, tie a simple overhand knot with that doubled loop, then pass the hook through the loop before cinching down. After the knot seats, feed about 4 inches of the tag end, roughly from the tip of your index finger to your first knuckle, back through the hook eye from front to back. That rethread step orients the hook point upward. Almost nobody explains why that matters, and I tied drop shots wrong for 2 full seasons before a buddy corrected me at a launch ramp. Hook point down means far fewer hook sets convert. Below the hook, the remaining tag end continues down to a drop shot weight. These are small clip-top sinkers sold specifically for this setup, available at any tackle shop. They run from 3/16 ounce to 3/8 ounce. A 3/16 ounce weight is roughly as heavy as 3/4 held flat in your palm, light enough to telegraph bottom feel through the line in shallow water. In anything deeper than 15 feet, about the height of a single-story house, bump up to 1/4 ounce to maintain clean bottom contact while your bait holds position above it. The distance between hook and weight is your leader. That leader length determines exactly where in the water column your bait sits relative to the bottom. Standard tutorials say 6 to 10 inches. I'll come back to why that's frequently the wrong number. Thread the bait onto the hook by pushing the point just barely through the nose of the soft plastic and stopping. A robo-worm, 4-inch straight-tail worm on a size 1 light wire. Gamakatsu drop shot hook is the combination I keep coming back to in clear to lightly stained water. The light wire, thinner gauge than a standard offset hook, lets the bait move more freely because there's less metal weight pulling the nose downward. 4 inches, about the distance from the base of your palm to the tip of your middle finger, is the right profile for bass in clear water with any fishing pressure on it. The biology of why this setup works more consistently than most people expect comes down to one specific prey behavior: injured bait fish suspend. A shad that's been clipped by a base, not fully consumed, doesn't sink to the bottom or sprint to the surface. It holds at a specific depth in the water column, trembling but not going anywhere. Bass detect this through the lateral line, a sensory organ running the length of their body that picks up pressure waves and micro vibrations in the surrounding water. An injured baitfish holding position and trembling produces a recognizable low-frequency signature. A drop-shot bait nose hooked and hanging freely with rod-tip micro-tremors replicates that signature closely enough that bass treat it as the real thing. This is partly why the setup outperforms drag presentations on pressured fish. Bays that have seen thousands of horizontal retrieves have developed conditioned avoidance to things moving toward them in a predictable line. A bait that holds position and trembles doesn't match that pattern. The fish investigates what its lateral line reads as a wounded, non-fleeing prey item that isn't going anywhere. A 2014 study from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife comparing presentation types across multiple sessions on Lake Castaic found that stationary finesse presentations targeting the upper water column between 8 and 18 feet outproduced bottom contact presentations by a ratio of roughly 2.3 to 1 during midday hours between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. The researchers attributed most of that variance to fish concentration above the thermocline during those afternoon hours. The bottom contact presentations weren't failing because the fish weren't hungry. They were failing because the fish were somewhere else entirely. Think about how many midday hours you've spent dragging presentations across the bottom while the fish were holding 12 feet above you. Not a pleasant thought, but a fixable one. The actual technique is less of a retrieve and more of a waiting game with occasional prompting. Cast, let the weight reach the bottom, reel up the slack until you feel the weight, and stop. The bait is now hanging at whatever depth your leader puts it above the bottom. In still or slow-moving water, you may not need to do anything at all for the first 20 seconds. Shake the rod tip with a small wrist movement, barely enough to see with your eyes, roughly the motion of shaking water off the tips of 2 fingers. That transmits through the line and produces the tremor the fish is reading as a struggling baitfish. After 15 to 20 seconds, drag the weight forward about 12 inches, roughly one slow pull of the arm, and stop again. The bait rises and swings forward as the weight moves, then settles back to hang at its leader depth when you stop. That rise-fall-hold sequence combined with the stationary shaking is the complete technique. It's slow, much slower than most anglers are comfortable running. A fishing buddy of mine described it as mostly just standing there with a line in the water, which is both accurate and possibly why it doesn't have more fans. Patience is the skill it actually tests. Line choice matters here more than most people account for. Use fluorocarbon for your leader, regardless of what your main line is. Fluorocarbon is a near-invisible line material that sinks in water, unlike monofilament, which floats and creates a bow in the line that kills your sensitivity. 6 to 8 pound test fluorocarbon, thin enough to practically disappear in clear water, lets the bait swing and tremble naturally. If you're running braid as your main line, braid being the high visibility, no stretch braided material that transmits feel better than anything else but spooks fish in clear water. Attach a 12 to 18 inch fluorocarbon leader above the hook with a double uni knot. 12 inches from your wrist to your elbow is the practical minimum before the braid to fluorocarbon connection starts affecting bait movement. In clear water, green pumpkin and watermelon red cover most situations. On Lake Champlain in Vermont or Dale Hollow in Tennessee, those 2 colors on a roboworm or Guggenbait slimcetic account for most of the base a drop shot is going to catch. In stained water where visibility drops under 2 feet, switch to Junebug or black and blue. Both colors produce a stronger silhouette when light penetration drops, because the base is reading a shape against dim background rather than detecting fine color detail. If you're finding this useful, subscribe. We've got more of these coming. There are specific situations where this setup stops working, and knowing them before you're frustrated on the water is worth the 2 minutes. During the spawn, roughly late April through early June, depending on your latitude and water temperature, bass are on beds acting on territorial instinct rather than hunger. They're not chasing prey items suspended in the water column. They're protecting a circular patch of gravel or sand on the bottom, and what gets them to bite is a perceived threat to that area, not a struggling bait fish above their heads. A drop shot hanging above an active bed gets bumped and pushed away without a real commitment. During spawn, a small swim bait or compact jerk bait fished aggressively near the bed. Anything that reads as a threat to the nest rather than a meal produces more results than finesse suspended above the fish. Heavy current is the second failure condition. The drop shot weight is calibrated for still to mildly moving water. In a river section or below a dam with real current, the weight drags downstream, the line bellies, and your bait is trailing behind at some uncontrolled angle rather than hanging at a precise depth. The precision collapses. In current, a jig with a paddle or curl tail, a front-weighted bait that holds position against flow, works where the drop shot can't. The third condition is ultra-pressured tournament water. On lakes running multiple tournament circuits from February through fall, base and accessible areas have seen every variation of the drop shot pause and shake enough times that the edge compresses. The technique still works on those waters, but the margin over other presentations shrinks. On lakes like the California Delta, where tournament pressure is essentially year-round, dropping to a size 2 or size 4 hook with a 2-inch bait extends the setup's effectiveness by falling outside the size range that pressured fish have learned to treat as suspicious. The cost reality behind the title is close but not quite exact, which is worth saying directly. A pack of drop shot specific soft plastics runs $5 to $6 and contains 15 baits. A pack of Gamakatsu light wire drop shot hooks runs under $4 for 8 hooks. A bag of drop shot weights runs under $3 for 10. Your total investment to rig a functional drop shot from scratch is around $15 to $20, and most of those components carry across multiple trips. Compare that to a single quality swim bait or crankbait at $10 to $15 per bait. The productivity advantage of the drop shot in the right conditions doesn't scale with cost in any direction that makes sense from a gear buying standpoint. Your tackle bag is probably already full of proof of that. This is also a spinning reel presentation. A spinning reel, the kind where the spool faces forward and the handle rotates a bail arm, handles the light weights involved naturally. A bait caster, the low-profile reel that sits on top of the rod and uses thumb pressure to control the spool during a cast, fights light terminal tackle, and introduces more frustration than results. Whatever spinning outfit you already own that can handle 6 to 10 pound fluorocarbon will do the job. There's no equipment upgrade required to run this effectively. What I said I'd come back to at the beginning, and I want to give it the space it deserves, is the leader length problem. 6 to 10 inches is what nearly every beginner tutorial recommends. That range is correct for one specific scenario, fishing when bass are actually on or near the bottom, within a foot or two of the substrate. If you're in that situation, a standard leader length works exactly as described, but the scenario where the drop shot consistently beats everything else, fish suspended in the mid-column above the thermocline, requires a different leader entirely. When fish are holding at 14 feet and the bottom sits at 22 feet, a 10-inch leader puts your bait at 21 feet and 2 inches. You're 7 feet below where the fish are, and close in that situation means nothing. The guides and tournament anglers who've worked this out adjust leader length based on where fish marks appear on the graph rather than defaulting to a fixed number. The adjustment point that most experienced finesse anglers use is 18 inches. That's roughly from your fingertip to the midpoint of your bicep with your arm extended. When marks are showing on the graph between 10 and 20 feet on a summer lake, an 18-inch leader positions your bait in that zone even when the bottom is considerably deeper, because you're letting the bottom serve as a depth anchor while your bait floats in the zone where the fish actually are. A tournament angler running the FLW circuit who talked through his finesse approach in a Wired 2 fish interview a few seasons back described leader adjustment as one of 3 variables that changed his finesse results more than any equipment or bait change. He'd been running fixed-length leaders for years, made the switch to dynamic adjustment based on graph marks during practice, and the improvement on suspended fish was significant enough that he now sets up multiple pre-rigged rods with different leader lengths when he suspects fish are holding off bottom. Before you decide the fish aren't responding to your drop shot, adjust the leader. Bump it to 18 inches if you're targeting fish showing above bottom on the graph. You'll know quickly whether the depth was the issue. The drop shot doesn't photograph well. There's nothing impressive about a small hook, a thin line, and a weight the size of a pencil eraser. It doesn't look like much lying in the bottom of your tackle box. The guys running it quietly between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m., while everyone else rests or burns moving baits, aren't fishing a secret. They're just fishing the right floor of the building. Take it out on your next trip. Fish it slower than feels comfortable. Give the bait time to work before you move it. When the rod loads and there's a fish there that wasn't there 10 seconds ago, you'll stop needing it explained.